The auctioneer's wooden hammer had been striking all morning, selling horses, cattle, and farmland. But when the 3 children were brought out, everyone became quiet. 3 small figures stood on the wooden stage, a boy with sunken cheeks and 2 girls whose clothes hung loose on their thin bodies. Their eyes searched the crowd of faces, looking for something that wasn't there, someone who cared. 8-year-old Ben held his sister's hands so tight his knuckles turned white. Emma, age 7, stood next to her younger sister Rose, who was only 5. Ben knew what this moment meant. Someone would purchase them, or they'd be sent to the poorhouse, where children vanished into a life of hard work and sadness. The morning sun blazed down on the platform, but all 3 children shook as if it were the middle of winter. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence. 3 children, ages 8, 7, and 5, brothers and sisters, strong enough for simple chores, but his words sounded empty. Everyone could see these weren't the healthy farm children families wanted. These were the leftover pieces of a broken world, too skinny, too frightened, too much trouble for most people to bother with. Casey Sullivan stood at the back of the crowd, her worn leather gloves folded in front of her simple riding outfit. She'd come to town for horse supplies. Not for this, but something about the way the youngest girl kept looking toward the hills, the same direction Casey's own ranch lay, made her boots stay planted on the dusty ground. A man in a fancy jacket stepped forward, looked at the children like they were livestock, then shook his head and walked away. Another possible buyer walked around the platform, asked about their health, their work skills, how much they ate. When the answers didn't please him, he too disappeared back into the crowd. Minutes felt like hours. The children's grip on each other got tighter with each rejection, their hope fading like a candle in the wind. Ben whispered something to his sisters, words of comfort that sounded too grown-up for his young voice. Emma nodded, but tears had started making clean lines down her dirty face. The auctioneer's patience was wearing thin. His money depended on sales, and these children weren't selling. Come on, folks. Strong backs, fast learners. Starting bid of $10 for all 3. Silence spread across the square like a held breath. Casey felt her heart pounding against her chest as she watched the crowd's coldness. These weren't children to them. They were a problem nobody wanted to take on. But Casey remembered being 8 years old herself, standing at a different kind of sale after her own parents died. She remembered the fear that tasted like metal in her mouth, the way grown-ups looked past her instead of at her. She remembered the woman who finally took her in, not because she felt sorry for her, but because she saw something worth saving. The auctioneer lowered his voice, desperation creeping in. $5. Surely someone needs help around their place. Still, nothing. A few people started walking away, their interest gone. The children's shoulders dropped as they understood what was happening. They were unwanted goods at the end of a long day, and the poorhouse wagon waited at the edge of town like a hungry monster. That's when Casey's hand shot into the air, cutting through the crowd's indifference like a knife through butter. But what she was about to discover about these children would test everything she thought she knew about taking in strays. Every head in the crowd turned toward Casey's raised hand like compass needles finding north. The auctioneer's relief was clear as he pointed in her direction. $5 to the lady in the back, going once, but before he could continue, a voice cut through the morning air. Hold on there. Sheriff Martinez pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the sunlight. Casey, you sure about this? These ain't your usual ranch hands. Casey kept her hands steady, though her heart beat faster. She knew what he meant. The children weren't just thin, they were broken in ways that went deeper than hunger. The boy's eyes held the kind of tiredness that came from being hurt by the very people who should have protected him. The girls flinched every time someone moved too quickly near the platform. I'm sure, Casey said, her voice carrying farther than she meant it to. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, stepped closer with a worried look that fooled nobody. Casey, dear, you live alone out there. 3 children, especially ones with problems. It's quite a big job. The word problems hung in the air like smoke. Casey understood the code. These children came with troubles. the kind that made good church families look the other way. But as she watched Ben pull his sisters closer, something fierce woke up in her chest. The auctioneer grew impatient. "Ma'am, are you bidding or not? $5? Casey called out clearly. "Going once. Going twice." The hammer started coming down. "Wait." A man in an expensive coat stepped forward. Casey knew him. Marcus Stone, who owned the biggest ranch in 4 counties. "I'll bid $6. The crowd murmured. Stone had shown no interest in the children moments before. Now his cold eyes fixed on Casey with something that looked like amusement. Someone should give them proper direction, I mean. Casey's blood turned cold. She'd heard stories about the children who worked Stone's ranch, how they aged beyond their years in just a few seasons, how some of them simply disappeared when they were no longer useful. $7, she said. Stone smiled, and it was the kind of smile that came before bad things. $10. The auctioneer's eyes lit up. This was more like it, a real bidding war. $10 to Mr. Stone. Do I hear 11? Casey's mouth went dry. $10 was 2 weeks' worth of supplies. But she looked at the children again, saw the terror creeping into their faces as they stared at Stone. Ben had moved completely in front of his sisters now, though he was no bigger than a scarecrow himself. $15, Casey said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. The crowd gasped. $15 for 3 half-starved children was crazy. Stone's smile disappeared, replaced by something darker. $20, he said, his voice sharp as a blade. Casey's heart sank. $20 was more than she'd brought to town. It was more than she could afford. But as she opened her mouth to give up, something unexpected happened that changed everything. Old Doc Henderson stepped out of the crowd, his medical bag in one hand and his wallet in the other. "I'll cover the difference," he said quietly to Casey. "These children need proper care, not what Stone offers." Stone's face darkened like a storm cloud. "This is highly irregular. The bidding should be straightforward." $20 to Miss Sullivan, the auctioneer announced quickly, sensing the tension building. Stone's reputation for settling arguments with his fists was well known. Going once, going twice. Stone stepped closer to Casey, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "You're making a mistake, Cowgirl. These children come with more trouble than you know. Going 3 times, sold to Miss Sullivan for $20. The hammer fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the surrounding buildings. Casey felt her knees shake with relief, but Stone wasn't finished. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her ears. "Ask the boy about the fire," he said. "Ask him what really happened to their parents." Before Casey could respond, Stone melted back into the crowd, leaving behind only the scent of whiskey and the cold weight of his words. Fire? What fire? The children were listed as orphans, their parents dead from sickness, according to the paperwork. But Stone's smile as he walked away suggested there was much more to the story. Casey approached the platform where Ben, Emma, and Rose still stood frozen, unsure whether their nightmare was over or just beginning. Up close, she could see details that broke her heart. The careful way Emma held her right arm, suggesting an old injury that hadn't healed right. The faded bruises on Ben's wrists where ropes had been. These children hadn't just lost their parents. They'd survived something terrible. Doc Henderson appeared beside her, counting bills into the auctioneer's palm. "Good choice, Casey, though I suspect you've bitten off more than you realize." "What do you mean?" The doctor glanced around, then lowered his voice. "These children didn't come from the county orphanage, like the papers claim. They came from Stone's ranch. Been working his spread for most of a year, until something happened that made him want to get rid of them legally." Casey's blood turned cold. "What kind of something?" "The kind that makes a man like Stone nervous about keeping witnesses around." Ben had been listening, his young face pale but determined. He climbed down from the platform and approached Casey carefully, like a wild animal testing whether this new human might be safe. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you've done. Mr. Stone, he don't like losing things he considers his." "You're not his anymore," Casey said firmly. "You're free now." Ben's laugh was bitter, far too old for his 8 years. "Nobody's free from Stone, ma'am. Not in this territory, and especially not children who've seen things they shouldn't have." Rose tugged on her brother's sleeve, her own voice thin as paper. "Tell her about the cellar, Ben. Tell her about the others." The crowd was breaking up now, the auction moving on to less dramatic items. But Casey felt the weight of watching eyes, the sense that this deal had created ripples that would spread far beyond this dusty town square. Doc Henderson packed his medical bag with careful slowness. "Casey, if you're smart, you'll take these children and leave town today. Don't go back to your ranch, not yet." "Why not?" "Because Stone's not the type to let things go. And these children, they know something that could destroy him, something worth killing for." Casey led the children toward her wagon, their small hands holding tight to the few things they owned. A tattered cloth horse for Rose, a carved wooden bird for Emma, and a small leather pouch for Ben that looked like it had been made by loving hands long ago. But as they reached the edge of the square, 3 of Stone's men appeared from the shadows between buildings like wolves emerging from the forest. "Miss Sullivan," the biggest one called out, his hand resting easily on his gun belt. "Mr. Stone would like a word." Casey positioned herself between the men and the children, feeling Ben, Emma, and Rose press against her back. "I paid fair and square. The children are mine now." "See, that's where you're wrong," the man continued, his smile cold as winter wind. "Those children have work to finish at Mr. Stone's ranch, debt to pay off." "What debt?" Casey demanded. "They're orphans." The man's laugh was like breaking glass. "Orphans who burned down their master's barn and cost him a season's worth of grain. Orphans who tried to run away twice, requiring expensive tracking. That debt don't just disappear because someone waves $20 around." Ben stepped forward, his young voice shaking but determined. "We never burned nothing. The barn caught fire when he locked us in the cellar during the storm. We were trying to get out." "Boy's got quite an imagination," the gunman said. "Makes up all sorts of stories to avoid taking responsibility." But Casey caught something in the man's eyes. A flicker of uncertainty when Ben mentioned the cellar. Doc Henderson had been right. These children had witnessed something that made Stone desperate to keep them quiet or make them disappear entirely. "If they owe money, I'll pay it," Casey said, though her heart sank at the thought. She'd already spent more than she could afford. "Afraid it don't work that way. Mr. Stone's got legal papers saying these children are bound to work his ranch until their debt is settled. Could take years." Casey felt anger building in her chest like a furnace. "Let me see these papers." The gunman's hand moved closer to his weapon. "Don't need to see nothing, lady. Just need to hand over the children and walk away." That's when Sheriff Martinez appeared, seemingly from nowhere, his own gun already drawn. "Problem here, boys?" The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. 3 of Stone's men against one aging sheriff didn't seem like good odds. But Casey noticed how the gunman's confidence wavered at the sight of the badge. "No problem, Sheriff," the leader said carefully. "Just collecting Mr. Stone's property." "Funny thing about property," Martinez replied, his voice deceptively calm. "I was just reviewing the official records, and these children were legally sold at public auction to Miss Sullivan. Any debt they might have owed was transferred with the sale. Mr. Stone sees it different. Mr. Stone can see it however he wants from the inside of a jail cell if he keeps interfering with legal deals." The standoff stretched like a tight rope, ready to snap. Casey could feel the children trembling behind her, their small bodies pressed tight against her legs. Casey made her choice in that split second of suspended time. She grabbed all 3 children's hands and pulled them toward the alley behind the general store, trusting her instincts over the false protection of badges and laws. In Stone's territory, law was whatever he decided it was. "Run," she whispered urgently. And they did. Behind them, she heard the sheriff's voice rise in anger, followed by the sound of boots on wooden sidewalks and shouts echoing off the buildings. But Casey knew these streets from 15 years of coming to town for supplies. She led Ben, Emma, and Rose through a maze of back alleys and narrow passages, their feet kicking up dust as they fled. They reached her wagon just as Stone himself appeared at the far end of the street, flanked by 6 more men. His face was a mask of cold fury, and Casey realized with sinking certainty that this wasn't just about controlling 3 children anymore. This was about power. She had just challenged him in front of the entire town. "Get in," she told the children. But Ben hesitated. "Ma'am, you don't understand. He'll never stop hunting us. We've seen what's in that cellar, what he does to people who cross him. You helped us, and now he'll hurt you too." Casey looked into the boy's eyes and saw a depth of knowledge that no 8-year-old should possess. Whatever was in Stone's cellar, whatever these children had witnessed, it was bad enough to make a grown man desperate to silence them permanently. "What did you see, Ben?" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Bodies, Mum. People who asked too many questions about missing children. People who tried to stand up to him. He keeps them down there as a reminder of what happens when folks don't mind their own business." Emma nodded, her small voice adding details that made Casey's blood freeze. "He made us carry food down there. Made us look at what was left. Said that's what happens to children who don't behave." The sound of approaching horses cut through their conversation. Stone's men were spreading out, surrounding the area where Casey's wagon sat. Escape by road was no longer possible. They'd be run down within a mile. "There's another way," Casey said, a desperate plan forming in her mind. "My ranch backs up to the mesa. There's a trail through the rocks that most folks don't know about, but we'll have to leave the wagon." They gathered what supplies they could carry. Water, some dried beef, and Casey's rifle. They slipped behind the blacksmith shop where the horses were kept. Casey's mare, Thunder, stood quietly in her stall, saddled and ready for the journey home that would never come. As they prepared to mount, Ben grabbed Casey's arm with surprising strength. "Ma'am, there's something else you need to know about the fire that killed our parents. It wasn't no accident. And it wasn't us that started it." "Who then?" "Stone. He wanted our land, the water rights, when Pa wouldn't sell. Stone came at night with torches. We hid in the root cellar while our house burned. Our parents, they didn't make it out." Casey felt the world tilt sideways. These children weren't just witnesses to whatever horrors lay in Stone's cellar. They were witnesses to murder, and she had just painted a target on all their backs by taking them in. The sound of boots echoed from the street nearby. Stone's men were getting closer, systematically searching every building, every hiding place. Soon, they'd check the blacksmith shop. "Can you ride?" Casey asked urgently. All 3 children nodded. They'd learned to ride at Stone's ranch, another skill beaten into them through necessity and fear. Casey boosted them onto Thunder's back, then swung up behind them. As they prepared to make their desperate escape into the wilderness, she heard Stone's voice echoing through the town like thunder. Stone's voice boomed across the town like a death sentence. $50 to whoever brings me the cowgirl. And those children, dead or alive. The words hit Casey like a physical blow. $50 was more money than most people in this territory saw in 6 months. Every desperate soul, every opportunistic drifter, every man with debts would be hunting them before sunset. They spurred Thunder toward the back trail that led to the mesa. But the mare was already showing signs of strain, carrying 4 riders. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Horses, dogs, and the voices of men motivated by more money than they'd ever dreamed of earning. The trail narrowed as it wound up into the rocks, forcing them to slow down despite the urgency hammering in Casey's chest. One wrong step here meant a fatal fall into the canyon below. But Ben surprised her by sliding forward on the saddle and taking the reins. "I know this trail," he said. "Used to hide up here when Stone's men got too rough. There's a cave about a mile ahead where we can rest Thunder and figure out what to do next." Casey marveled at the boy's composure. Most children would be crying with terror by now, but Ben had been hardened by experiences no child should endure. Emma and Rose, too, sat quietly behind their brother, their small hands gripping his shirt with the practiced calm of someone who'd learned that panic meant death. They reached the cave just as Thunder's breathing became labored. The small cavern was hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the air was cool and carried the sound of trickling water from deeper within the mountain. "There's a spring back there," Ben explained, helping his sisters down from the horse. "And the cave goes deep, has other ways out if we need them." Casey studied the boy with new respect. "How do you know all this?" "When you're scared all the time, you learn every place you can hide," Ben said simply. As they led Thunder deeper into the cave to water her at the spring, Rose finally spoke up. "Mom, why did you help us?" "Most folks just look the other way when Stone wants something." Casey knelt down to the girl's eye level, seeing her own reflection in those two wise eyes. "Because someone helped me once when I had nowhere else to go. And because what Stone's doing isn't right, no matter how much power he has." "But now you're in danger too," Rose said. "Because of us?" "No, sweetheart. I'm in danger because I chose to do what's right. That's different." From outside the cave came the distant sound of riders passing below, their voices carrying on the wind as they searched the lower trails. Casey counted at least 8 different voices, maybe more. Stone wasn't taking any chances. Ben moved to the cave entrance and peered through the vines. "They'll search all day, but they don't know about this place. Problem is, they'll be watching the roads out of the territory. And Stone's got friends in the next county over too." Casey felt the weight of their situation settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. They were trapped in the wilderness with limited supplies, being hunted by every desperate person for miles around. And even if they somehow escaped Stone's immediate reach, where could they go that his influence wouldn't follow? That's when Rose pulled something from her small bundle of possessions that changed everything Casey thought she knew about their situation. Rose unwrapped a small leather pouch from inside her cloth horse's torn body. Her movements were careful and deliberate. Inside were 3 items that made Casey's breath catch: a photograph, a folded letter, and a small brass key. "Before our house burned," Rose whispered, "Pa gave me these. Told me to hide them no matter what, and if anything happened to him and Ma, to find someone trustworthy and show them." Casey studied the photograph first. It showed a group of men standing in front of what looked like a mine entrance, their faces serious. She recognized Stone immediately, but also Sheriff Martinez, Doc Henderson, and several other important men from town. At the bottom, someone had written Eagle Rock Mine, 1883. "There's no mine around here," Casey said, confused. Ben nodded grimly. "That's 'cause it ain't a mine. It's where Stone keeps the children he takes. The ones who disappear and never get reported missing 'cause they got no family to speak for them." Casey's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. It was written in a shaky hand, as if the writer had been injured or terrified. "To whoever finds this, my name is Samuel Henderson, and I pray someone will discover the truth before more innocents die. The mine at Eagle Rock is not abandoned as claimed. Marcus Stone uses it as a prison for children he gets through illegal auctions and false contracts. They work the underground tunnels until they collapse from exhaustion or injury. Those who try to escape or cause trouble are never seen again. I have tried to gather evidence, but Stone's influence reaches too far. The sheriff, the banker, even some of the church leaders, they all profit from the operation. If something happens to me, look for the entrance hidden behind the waterfall at Devil's Canyon. The key opens the overseer's office where records are kept. Samuel Henderson." Casey looked up at Doc Henderson's name in the letter, then back at the photograph. Samuel Henderson. Any relation to Doc Henderson? "His son," Ben said quietly. "He tried to help the children at the mine. Stone caught him and made sure he had an accident with his horse. Doc Henderson knows his boy was murdered, but he can't prove it. That's why he helped you today. He's been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to Stone." The brass key was small and fancy, clearly meant for something important. Casey turned it over in her palm, feeling the weight of what these children had entrusted to her. They weren't just witnesses to Stone's crimes. They were carrying the evidence that could bring down his entire operation. From outside the cave came the sound of riders passing closer this time, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. "Check every cave, every hiding spot. Stone wants them found before dark." Casey made a decision that surprised even herself. "We're not running anymore." Ben looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Mom, you can't fight Stone. He's got too many men, too much power." "Not Stone directly," Casey said, studying the letter again. "But we can expose the truth. If that mine really exists, if there are children being held there." "There are," Emma said softly. "We seen them when Stone took us there once. Dozens of them living like animals underground. Some so sick they could barely stand." Casey felt righteous fury building in her chest like a prairie fire. She'd spent her whole life minding her own business, keeping her head down, surviving quietly on her small ranch. But some things were worth risking everything for. "How far is Devil's Canyon from here?" "About 3 miles north," Ben said. "But ma'am, even if we could get to the mine, even if we could free those children, Stone would just hunt us all down. He's got nowhere else to run if his secret gets out." Casey looked at all 3 children, seeing not just the fear in their eyes, but also a flicker of hope. The first real hope they'd probably felt in years. Someone finally believed them. Someone was finally willing to fight. "Then we better make sure he doesn't get the chance to run," Casey said. "But first, we need allies, and I think I know exactly where to find them." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls with shades of gold and crimson, Casey prepared to make the most dangerous gamble of her life. Casey led the children back toward town as darkness fell, but not to surrender. Instead, they circled around to Doc Henderson's house, where a single lamp burned in the window like a beacon of hope. When the doctor opened his door to find them standing on his porch, his face went white with shock. "Casey, what are you doing here? Stone's got half the territory looking for you." "Samuel left something behind," Casey said simply, holding up the letter. "Something that proves everything." Doc Henderson's hands shook as he read his son's words. Tears carved tracks down his weathered cheeks, and when he finished, his grief had transformed into something harder and more dangerous. "I've been a coward," he whispered. "My boy died trying to save those children, and I've done nothing but treat wounds and keep quiet." "It's not too late," Casey said, "but we need help. We need people who aren't afraid of Stone anymore." Within an hour, Doc Henderson had quietly gathered a group of allies. The new circuit judge, who'd arrived just that morning, 2 federal marshals who'd been investigating missing persons reports, and surprisingly, Sheriff Martinez himself. "I've been building a case for months," Martinez admitted. "But I needed proof. Witnesses who would testify. Stone's been threatening to kill anyone who talks." "We have proof now," Casey said, showing them Samuel's letter and the key. "And we have witnesses." The plan they hatched was simple but dangerous. While Stone's men continued searching the wilderness for Casey and the children, the marshals would raid the hidden mine. Doc Henderson would treat any children they found, and the judge would ensure Stone faced justice regardless of his local influence. But first, they needed to confirm the mine's location and document what they found there. Casey, Ben, Emma, and Rose guided the group through the darkness to Devil's Canyon. Behind the waterfall, exactly as Samuel's letter described, they found a concealed entrance. The brass key opened a heavy wooden door that led into a nightmare. The tunnels were worse than even Ben had described. Dozens of children, some as young as 4, worked in conditions that would have killed grown men. They were skeletal, exhausted, and so broken by their captivity that they barely looked up when strangers appeared. Doc Henderson wept openly as he examined child after child, documenting injuries and malnutrition that would serve as evidence in court. The federal marshals took photographs and recorded testimonies from those children strong enough to speak. By dawn, they had rescued 47 children, and gathered enough evidence to bury Stone for a dozen lifetimes. When Stone's men returned from their fruitless search, they found federal marshals waiting with arrest warrants. Stone himself was captured trying to flee toward Mexico, his saddlebag stuffed with gold and documents that revealed the scope of his operation. The trial became the biggest news in 4 territories. When it was over, Stone and 7 of his associates faced the hangman's rope. Casey officially adopted Ben, Emma, and Rose, and her quiet ranch became a refuge for several other children who had nowhere else to go. Doc Henderson, free from his burden of guilt and fear, became like a grandfather to them all. Ben grew up to become a federal marshal himself, dedicating his life to protecting children who couldn't protect themselves. Emma became a doctor, working alongside Doc Henderson to heal both bodies and spirits. Rose became a teacher, ensuring that no child in their territory went without education or hope. Years later, when people asked Casey why she'd risked everything for 3 starving children at an auction, her answer was always the same. Because someone has to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. That's what makes us human. The old mine was sealed forever, but the children it had held were free to grow, to dream, to become more than the broken souls Stone had tried to create. And in a territory where power had once meant the ability to hurt others, it now meant the courage to help them heal.